All right, I think we're ready to start. Can we shut that door? I don't know if I don't want people to get distracted from this information that's about to happen. So, all right, thank you very much. Cool. All right, so I guess we're starting late. There were some technical issues and some other various things, so now we're starting. So, welcome to this talk that I'm about to give on the Node.js reference architecture that we have been creating on our team here at Red Hat and IBM, but I will get into all that in a second. One second. You can come in. Go ahead. Come on. You just made it. Just made it. Okay. Right. So just a little bit about me. I'm Luke. I'm a software engineer at Red Hat. I work on the Node Shift project there, which is us kind of getting Node to be like a first-class citizen on OpenShift and kind of those enterprisey things there. If you're on Twitter, or X as it is now, Sienna Luke there. This was from a virtual presentation, this slide, so I'm 5'7" because you can't really see, when we're sitting down. Just in case anybody cared. I'm also a Mets fan, which if anybody is here is a Mets fan, you know how bad it was this year. Also a Devils fan. It's very early in the season, so I am crossing my fingers. And then so last night, my youngest son got 149 pieces of Halloween candy, and about 10 of those were actually full bars. So yeah, so I never got those when I was a kid, but our neighborhood, I guess, is a little bit better. The people who do not have kids were the hander-outers of the full candy, right? So anyway, so I live in upstate. Well, technically, I guess I live in the Capital District according to this map. This audience is probably the only audience possibly that will understand this, being from New York or New Jersey or wherever you're from. Yes, I always say I'm from upstate New York, but I am from the Capital District. I live right outside of Albany, or Albany as they say up there. Yeah, just a quick thing there, right? Okay, so let's just get into this whole thing. Right, so one of the things for if you're doing enterprise applications, Node applications specifically, and not even Node specifically, this is kind of for every kind of, I think, language that's out there or any kind of enterprise. There's kind of these challenges. And I listed 3 here, but there's probably, obviously there's more. But these pertain to what we're going to be talking about later on. One is the module ecosystem, right? Being Node developers or JavaScript developers, we're always going on NPM. We're always getting these community things that are out there. It's also huge. Licenses, there's, licenses, there's a lot of different licenses out there. And then, consistency. I think this is probably true maybe for larger companies where you have a lot of individual teams working on things and everybody's picking different things that they're doing, and we'll see some things for that too. Right, so kind of looking at the Node module ecosystem first, I just ran these counts the other day. I'm not really sure what's happening with that huge spike there, but that light blue color is Node, and you can see how it is way ahead of the rest of the other package ecosystem, the other languages in terms of their package ecosystems. We rely on packages like every day for stuff.
I think the spike was a DDoS.
Quite possible, yeah.
I guess malware.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it's fast moving. You can see how quickly that's moving between 2016 or so to now. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? And then this is just a screenshot of NPM from a couple days ago. What is that? Downloads, is that in the trillions over there? It's a lot of numbers. And there's they obviously will list popular libraries and stuff that people are using, and then they try to help you discover things based on, whether it's front end or back end or the different categories and that stuff. But, there's a lot of stuff out there, basically. A lot of choice, right? All right, so in terms of the licenses, that's basically me with the hands up. Like I know nothing about licenses. And like there's, here's this wheel of licenses that are available. I'm sure there's some other ones as well. But right, that's a very tough thing, is to figure out what license you need, like what they do, what's the difference between them. You might be writing an application that needs, that you're going to give to a customer that has to be a particular license because maybe that code you can't distribute. So these things are also very tough. And then, the consistency thing. So these pictures, yes, are just web frameworks. I type into Google, top web frameworks for Node. And there's a lot of similar ones, but there's also a lot of ones that don't exist anymore or are very low in the thing, or ones that are very popular but actually aren't on these lists. So, there's a lot of different choice out there. I'm trying to be consistent across your organization is kind of be a helpful thing. And like I said, this is just web frameworks. You have the same in like testing or the same in databases or other categories. So that's kind of, in those three things, that's kind of the reason why we wanted to create this kind of reference architecture for Node. And reference architecture is a weird word because I know it means certain things in certain languages, but it's kind of what we called it, right? So, we can't be experts on the whole entire ecosystem. Like I mentioned earlier, there's, I think I have written here 2 million plus packages. We can't be experts on all those. So like our experience, so the things that we are going to recommend here are coming from our team's opinion, and I'll get into a minute who the actual team is. And kind of relate to the consistency, if you have more, this grammar is not well, but more different packages equals more harder help. If you have all these various teams using all these very different packages, it's obviously a lot harder to help those people or customers if there's multiple different packages and everybody's not kind of conforming to one thing. And then the other thing we wanted to do was to make sure we shared our knowledge across the different teams that are doing this reference architecture, because a lot of the teams have different little bits of knowledge there and bits of knowledge here. We can't be experts on everything, so we kind of we're trying to bring it all together. And like I mentioned, the team, so it's Red Hat and IBM across the two companies. The people that show up here from the companies have these large JavaScript and Node deployments, and we're trying to kind of be consistent between the two. So if one team from the company says, hey, we need to do something with databases, but we don't know anything, they can go and ask another team that has done stuff, and then they can do the recommendations. But instead of trying to figure out who that team is, they can actually go to this central repository here that we have, and they can read that. Right, so I kind of said what it is. So what it isn't is we're not choosing a winner. And anybody who's been around the Node ecosystem and JavaScript ecosystem long enough knows that people love their choices. And if you say, oh, everybody should use this, there's a whole whatever of people who are no, you're an idiot and I hate you and you suck and you should use this other thing instead. Not very constructive with the stuff. That's, I think, toned down a little bit, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Right, so we're not choosing a winner here. We're not saying this is a community spec, everybody needs to use this and this is what you should do. This is very specific to our, what our team's opinions are and what our team has experience with, right? And it's also, if somebody used to read this, it's not a contract for support. So just because we recommend something doesn't mean that we, as IBM or Red Hat, are going to support it, unless it's noted. We do have certain modules that we say are supported, like test and verify, for instance, is where we test those things on the RHEL and the Fedora platforms to make sure that they work with our versions of Node. But in general, the reference architecture, it's just the opinions on what we recommend, not support or not choosing a winner and that kind of stuff. Because that's always a question, oh, are you choosing this thing? Well, we used it, so yes, that's why we're choosing it. Right. So when we went through and just figured out what topics we should kind of cover and stuff like that, we kind of broke them up into these 3 high-level topics, which were functional components, development, and operations. In terms of functional components, we have things like the web frameworks, is it Express? Is it something else? We actually are choosing Express just because even though it hasn't had a new release in, 7 years or something like that, we're still choosing it because it's what we have the experience with and that kind of stuff. And of course, we'll go back and we can, we periodically will review what we're recommending and and see if things need to change and that kind of stuff. All right, yeah, so anyway, functional components, things like the web frameworks, the databases, how you consume services, whether, like for that one, we don't actually use requests. I think we were saying like Axios or Fetch or something like that now that it's built in. But those are kind of the things for functional components. We also have a development section, which goes into the things that you would do while you're developing. Things like testing, code coverage, that kind of stuff. Building how you would build good containers and that kind of thing. Choosing and vetting dependencies was also a very big one. And then the last kind of big high-level one was the operations, because you do need to know like what's going on with your application when you have it running. So we wanted to figure out like, all right, what should you use for logging? What should you do for handling errors and that kind of stuff? Right. So just to kind of give you an idea of what the format is, first we kind of have like, here's our recommended components that we have, and then the next section is there's a bit of guidance. That could be where like, hey, we did this and it worked out well for us, or hey, there's this gotcha with this particular library, so you might not want to do that kind of thing. So like those kinds of things that we found and that the other teams have found will go into the kind of the guidance section in there. And most of the different components follow this recommendation or follow this format. I think there's a couple that are slightly different, but for the most part, everything is like this. Right, so once we start recommending things, we do want to have a due diligence of saying and looking at the things that we're recommending. So for the modules, we have a list of things saying, okay, if we see a module that we like, we go through this list, make sure it's not deprecated. Of course, we have an asterisk there because I know Express isn't deprecated, but it's a long way from, I think, being kind of something. Whether or not it has the appropriate licenses or not, whether it'll run on the latest long-term support version of Node, if it has appropriate testing, and then if it's appropriately maintained. Again, there's an asterisk on this one as well because I'm going to use Express again in this example. It does have security releases, but there's like one person that does that. So these are more of guidelines than like hard and fast rules and that kind of stuff. And then we also have this module that we wrote specifically for this due diligence stuff. It's also a community module, so you could also use it, called MP Check. So it goes and I only put a few of the kind of the different plugins that we call them, things that it checks. But we check to see if there's what the license is, if there's CVEs for certain modules. When it was released last, if it's deprecated. We also look to see if it's in Sitchem, which is with the canary in the gold mine, I think, which is a part of the Node.js project, which they will test popular modules to make sure they're not breaking anything on new releases of Node. So we test to see, we look to see, is the module that we're testing, that we're recommending in that thing? And if it's not, we've actually gotten modules into that in there that we are recommending. And then there's a bunch of other things that we also look at too in there. But those are kind of the big ones. And we get this kind of this printout of this huge long thing. And you could also, if there are CVEs for certain modules, you can say, well, allow that. There's some things where you can do to override certain things as well. So this has been a great kind of check for us. And we've also done a blog series on Red Hat developers for the sections. We in the past we tried to publish 2 every quarter. We actually just finished the series, and we just finished all of the sections that we set out to complete in the reference architecture. So I guess, when I say complete with the quotes, because nothing is really ever complete in software, we'll go back and we'll review those kinds of things. And just as a FYI, here is our top rated posts that we've had are on the building good containers and choosing a web framework, which is probably to nobody's surprise that what our opinion on web frameworks are is one of the top rated blog posts. Right, and then I just wanted to share this. This is just for our own, being like, hey, people are really responding to the repo here. I'm not big on GitHub stars. I'm more of a forker, I guess. If I see a repo I like, I'm usually forking and not starring it. But This is a pretty cool metric here. Those straight up and down lines are actually from when the repo got mentioned in, I think, Node Weekly, one of the mailers. So marketing works, people, and yeah. So it seems like people in the community are responding very well to what we're doing there and that kind of thing. All right. So what is next in our kind of now we've gotten all the Node-related backend things. The next thing is we're going to want to do a web version of that. And here is, so we kind of reworked a little bit. So we still have those high-level like functional components and development and operations. But what we did was we broke it into common backend and front end. And you'll see that for development, there's a good amount of common things. And so that as we go through, if we see like, oh, these two things are matching up, then we'll join them together. If we look at the common things and we're like, well, there is differences, we'll split them up again. And I think our goal is to, once we get pretty far in the web architecture here, is to combine them into one repo instead, because right now they are two separate repos as we're working. But that's kind of where we're going. I think we're working on styling first, but there's a lot of like front-end frameworks I know is probably going to be a very large discussion, because those are changing every day, I feel like. Right. So this whole thing wasn't just supposed to be me saying, hey, look what we did. It's also to share, say, hey, we did this, and if you guys are at larger companies, or not even larger companies, or have multiple things, and you want to do it yourself, this is kind of what we did. It worked for us. One of the things, we shared our opinions. And a lot of these things is probably like, yeah, I know already. Like, yeah, it's obvious. Like, for instance, trying to be consistent. I know I should be doing that all the time. Do I? No, I don't. But just putting it on the list, right? So sharing our opinions across the team, or sharing your opinions across the different teams of your organization, trying to be consistent with, if everybody's using, for instance, one of our recommendations for linting is ESLint. So we made sure that all of our projects and all of our modules that we have and that we create new are all going to be using ESLint, instead of some other thing. We wanted everything to be the same. Or for testing frameworks, I think we chose Mocha as well. So we changed some of our things that weren't in Mocha to be in Mocha. And then I'm also mentioning these projects, but if anybody, they're all in the OpenJS Foundation, basically. That's what I was trying to get at. Not that we are choosing not that all of our recommendations are OpenJS Foundation projects, but it seems like a good amount of them are OpenJS Foundation projects. And if you were to look at our recommendations compared to, or our opinions compared to what the community is recommending, it is very similar. It's probably like 95% like the same. So it feels good that like we're also very similar to the community, and we're not far off with like, oh no, we want to do this completely different. Right. So if you are thinking about creating something like this, make sure you also do that module, or that should be module. That is incorrectly spelled. Due diligence. Checking those different deprecations, especially licenses and CVEs, and then doing the periodic review. Right. So that's it. Thank you very much for coming. I think these slides are on the website that is there. These are links to the Node reference architecture, the web one, and also just our Node topic page on Red Hat developers. So we have time for questions. If anybody has questions, it could be about this. It could be about anything, really.
I'll go. Michael Windsor with Alpha Omega. I looked on the website. You talk a little bit about CI/CD, more focused on testing than on what I would call sort of build system integrity. Probably the most difficult problem for people to solve without clear guidance is how to secure their build environments. Do you guys care about that?
I mean, I'm sure we do, but when we write certain things, it's definitely more focused on the Node, like what you would do for Node applications, not necessarily like, I think that is probably a little bit more higher than what we would get into. But again, we're always kind of adding things and changing things. So if that's something we want to add, I'm sure we could add that. Okay. Oh,
So you mentioned obviously people have very strong opinions about different modules and packages that may be used. How do you keep feedback to be relevant and on point where it can be critical feedback that you guys can incorporate that maybe you should reevaluate a package? Do you find it's hard to keep community comments on point for something like this?
I mean, for the most part, I don't think we've actually. I think once we said like we're not choosing a winner, it's just from our opinion of what we've used and worked for us. I think once we actually have said that, there hasn't been like, oh, you guys suck and you guys should do this. Like it has been pretty good with that. And you know, there was a comment, there was a GitHub issue that somebody created with, and it was asking like, hey, now that Node has its own built-in test runner, are you going to go back and look at that? And so that's something we've had on our agendas in our meetings to say, hey, look, this is there. You know, is anybody using this now? And you know, let's start to reevaluate that. Yeah. All right. Oh.
You just mentioned Michael Dawson is the chair of the Node Technical Steering Committee.
Right. Yeah. So one of the team members who leads both Red Hat and IBM's JavaScript stuff is Michael Dawson, who is the TSC chair. And I should also mention that if anybody here is going to NodeConf EU next week, I think it's next week, he'll also be giving a talk on, I think, add-ons and built-in native add-ons and stuff. Yeah. Right, yeah, so the team is, you know, we have Michael, and then we also have a few other people who are on like build and various other Node-related projects, so we do have a pretty good, you know, I guess, as it were, to the community. Okay, I think the awkward pause is long enough to say we are done. All right, thank you everybody for coming.